Hi, my name is Rachel Moore, and I'm 32 years old. At my parents' 30th anniversary party, they unveiled a beautiful, custom-painted family tree with 112 names on it. The only one missing was mine. They didn't just forget me, they erased me. But 3 days later, my sister was calling her lawyer in a panic, and my parents were staring at a foreclosure notice. I reminded them what erasure really costs. Before I tell you how that single moment changed everything, make sure to like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. The applause felt like a wave hitting a wall. It was loud, joyous, and everywhere in the packed living room. My parents, beaming under a spotlight my brother Mark had rigged up, pulled a gold-colored sheet off the wall. Behind it was the centerpiece of their 30th anniversary celebration, a massive, floor-to-ceiling painting of a sprawling oak tree. Its branches were heavy with names, each one written in delicate gold calligraphy, some accompanied by tiny, hand-painted portraits. The family tree. My sister Jessica had been talking about it for months, calling it the ultimate tribute to, the Moore family legacy. Everyone surged forward, a chorus of oohs and ahs filling the air. Glasses clinked. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a cocktail napkin. My father stood with his arm around her, his chest puffed out with pride. I smiled too. I'd contributed a significant amount of money to the project when Jessica had told me they were short on funds for the artist she wanted. "It's for Mom and Dad," I'd said, transferring the money without a second thought. "Make it beautiful." And it was beautiful, intricate, detailed, permanent. I hung back, letting the aunts and cousins get their first look. I watched, their fingers trace the lines, finding their own names, their children's names. I saw the happy recognition on their faces. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing I had helped make this moment happen. After a few minutes, the crowd thinned a little, and I made my way closer. I wanted to find my spot on our family's story. I started at the trunk, where my grandparents' names were written, their black and white wedding photo painted beside them. I followed the branch up to my parents, Thomas and Mary Moore. From them, 3 main branches emerged. Mark, Jessica, and me. I found Mark's branch first. It was thick and prominent. His name was there in bold script, Mark Thomas Moore, MBA. Beside it, a portrait of his smiling wife, and below them, their 2 sons. Then I found Jessica's branch, Jessica Moore Chen, it read. It was covered in blossoms, with portraits of her husband and their 3 perfect daughters. I kept searching for the 3rd branch, my branch. I scanned the area around my siblings, then the branches above, then below. My eyes moved faster, a frantic search and rescue mission. I saw my Uncle Bill, my cousin Susan from Arizona, even my mother's second cousin who had passed away 20 years ago. They were all there. They had even included the family's golden retriever, Buddy, who had died last spring. He was painted at the base of the tree with a little halo over his head. 112 names. That's what Jessica had boasted about. 112 connections, all painted in gold. Mine wasn't one of them. My throat went tight, but I didn't make a sound. The air in my lungs felt heavy and cold. I took a step back, my gaze fixed on the empty space where my name should have been. No one had forgotten. A mistake like this wasn't possible. This was a statement. I looked over at my family. My mother was laughing with her sister. My father was accepting a slap on the back from a neighbor. My siblings were soaking in the praise for their wonderful gift. They were all so happy, celebrating a family I apparently wasn't a part of. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't demand an explanation. I just turned around, walked through the smiling crowd, and let myself out the front door. They had erased me, but in the quiet of my car, with the sound of their party still humming through the closed door, I decided something. If they wanted me gone, I would be gone, but I would take my name, my support, and my money with me. Part 2. The Family. Celebration. The lead-up to the party had been a textbook Moore family production. For 2 months, the family group chat, ironically titled Moore Family Strong, had been buzzing with a constant stream of messages, 90% of which came from my sister Jessica. She was the event's self-appointed director, a role she took on with the same manicured intensity she applied to her online fashion boutique. Every day brought a new flurry of decisions I was expected to weigh in on, but never truly influence. "Okay, everyone, vote on napkin colors, gold or ivory. Vote now." A message would ping, followed by 2 pristine photos. Before I could even type a response, my brother Mark's vote would come in, Gold. Looks classier. My mother would follow a minute later. Oh, gold is lovely, Jessie. And that would be that. The decision was made. My input was solicited as a formality, a performance of inclusion that had long ago lost its meaning. It was the same with the catering, the playlist, the floral arrangements. I was given the illusion of a voice, but the microphone was never plugged in. I was autistic, and my family had long ago decided that my way of thinking was too rigid, too logical for things like party planning. They preferred to interpret my thoughtful questions as criticism and my silence as disinterest. It was easier for them that way. The house on the day of the party was a testament to Jessica's vision. It was almost unrecognizable. The comfortable, slightly worn-out home I grew up in had been transformed into a sterile event space. Ivory drapes were swagged over the windows, gold-colored balloons were clustered in the corners, and every surface was covered with white roses that made the whole house smell like a funeral. A bartender, a young man with a stiff bow tie, stood behind a makeshift bar set up in the dining room, an area usually reserved for chaotic family dinners and piles of my father's unopened mail. Relatives I hadn't seen in years filled the my rooms. They moved in predictable orbits, clutching glasses of champagne and making the same small talk they'd been making for 30 years. Aunt Carol was complaining about her new neighbors. Uncle Dave was boasting about his son's recent promotion. The air was thick with perfume, hairspray, and the low, constant hum of polite conversation. I navigated through the crowd, offering quiet smiles and nodding at the right moments. It was a performance I had perfected over a lifetime. The role of the quiet, unassuming daughter, the easy one, the one who didn't cause a fuss. My main contribution to the event, besides the check I had written, was to stay out of the way. When I'd arrived an hour early to see if I could help, Jessica had shooed me away from the kitchen. "Rach, honestly, it's fine. Everything's handled," she'd said, her eyes flicking over my simple navy blue dress. The dress was a quiet rebellion. Jessica had sent a link in the group chat a month prior with a suggested attire list, featuring sequined gowns and cocktail dresses from her own online store. I had ignored it. "Can you just go make sure Dad doesn't start telling his boring work stories to the caterers again?" she'd added, turning her back to me to adjust a flower arrangement. I found my father, Thomas, holding court by the fireplace, exactly as predicted. He was a man who loved an audience. He had a booming voice and a laugh that was more of a bark, and he treated every conversation like a negotiation he had to win. He saw me approaching, and his face, already flushed, from his first drink, broke into a wide grin. "There she is! My little accountant," he bellowed, pulling me into a one-armed hug that smelled of whiskey and aftershave. He called me his accountant because I managed my own finances well, something he both admired and resented. To him, my stability was an indictment of his own often precarious financial situation, a reality I was expected to silently patch over whenever necessary. "Everyone, this is my daughter, Rachel. She's the smart one, too smart for her own good sometimes." The small group of his colleagues chuckled politely. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. It was his classic move, a compliment wrapped around an insult, a little public reminder of my place. I was smart, but I was not to get arrogant. I was successful, but I was not to outshine my siblings. Mark, his son, was the heir. Jessica, his daughter, was the princess. I was the utility player, the one who kept the lights on behind the scenes. Mark was standing near the bar, looking pleased with himself. He had taken credit for the lighting and the sound system, and he was explaining the technical specifications to anyone who would listen. Mark worked in middle management at a tech company, and he carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he was destined for the corner office. He saw success in terms of titles and possessions, and he viewed my nonprofit work with a kind of baffled pity. "I still don't get why you waste your time at that place, Rach," he'd told me over dinner a few months ago. "You could be making real money, like 6 figures easy." "I like my job, Mark," I had replied calmly. "It feels important." He had just shaken his head, taking a large bite of steak. "Helping people is a hobby, not a career." That was the core of my family's philosophy. Value was measured in dollars, in status, in appearances. My quiet, steady life, my modest apartment, my savings account that I never spoke of, but that they all seemed to rely on. None of it registered as success. It was just there, a resource to be tapped. The conversation that had led to my funding the family tree mural was a perfect example of this. Jessica had called me 2 months before the party, her voice a syrupy blend of excitement and manufactured stress. "Oh my God, Rach, I have the most amazing idea for Mom and Dad's gift, but it's so expensive," she'd sighed dramatically. She explained her grand vision for the family tree, a bespoke piece of art from a trendy local artist. She described the gold leaf, the calligraphy, the tiny portraits. It was meant to be a legacy, something the family would treasure forever. "It sounds wonderful, Jess," I said, and I meant it. My parents loved sentimental gestures. It is, right? But the artist is quoting $5,000. Mark and I can pull together maybe half of that, but with the party costs, I just don't know. She let the sentence hang in the air, a baited hook. I knew my role. I always knew my role. "I can help," I said. "How much do you need?" The relief in her voice was immediate. "Oh, Rach, would you? That would be amazing. 2,000 would be a lifesaver. You're the best." "Of course," I said. "Just send me your bank details. I'd love to be involved. Maybe I can help with gathering the names and dates?" The shift in her tone was subtle but clear. "Oh, don't you worry about any of the details. You've done more than enough with the money. Mark and I can handle the logistics. You know how you get with details, you'd probably find a typo from 1880 and want to redo the whole thing." She'd laughed. A light, tinkling sound that was meant to sound affectionate but landed like a barb. I let it go. I always let it go. It was the price of admission to my own family. I transferred the $2,000 that day. I saw the charge go through on my banking app. Jessica Chen. Reason. Family gift. I felt a small, warm feeling. I was helping. I was a part of this. Now, standing in the middle of the crowded party, that feeling was gone, replaced by a growing unease. The celebration felt hollow, a stage play where I was the only one who hadn't been given a script. My mother floated by, her face a mask of social grace, touching my arm for a fleeting second. "Isn't this wonderful, dear?" she whispered, her eyes already scanning the room for her next conversation. "Jessica did such a marvelous job." "She did," I agreed, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. The whole evening was a monument to the family I was supposed to belong to. The speeches, the toasts, the slideshow of old photos that Jessica had curated, they all told a story. It was a story of two bright, successful children, Mark and Jessica, and their loving, proud parents. I was there, a ghost in the background of some of the pictures, a footnote in a story that wasn't about me. And then, just before they unveiled the tree, my father tapped his glass for a toast. He spoke about 30 years of marriage, about legacy, and pride. He raised his glass. "To my family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To my incredible wife, Mary, and to my children, Mark and Jessica, who organized all of this and who make me proud every single day. You are my legacy." He looked right past me. The moment the gold sheet fell away from the wall, the room erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a genuine collective gasp of admiration. The mural was undeniably stunning. The artist had painted a magnificent old oak, its roots digging deep into the earth at the bottom of the canvas, and its branches reaching all the way to the ceiling. The background was a soft, twilight blue, making the golden leaves and calligraphy shimmer under the lights Mark had so proudly installed. It looked like something out of a storybook, a gilded history of a perfect family, my family. Our family, felt a swell of pride, a genuine happiness for my parents. This was the kind of grand, romantic gesture my mother adored. She loved things that signified permanence, history, a story that would last. My father, for all his gruffness, loved the idea of legacy, of a bloodline stretching back through time. This gift was perfect for them, and I had helped make it happen. That thought was a quiet comfort as I watched my relatives crowd around the wall. I waited patiently, letting the initial wave of excitement pass. I wasn't one to push to the front. I was used to waiting my turn. I watched as my Aunt Carol found her name and squealed with delight. I saw my cousin Tim lift his young son up so he could see his own tiny portrait. It was a moment of connection, of belonging, and I wanted to feel it too. Finally, a path cleared, and I stepped forward. My heart beat a little faster with anticipation. I knew what my siblings' branches would look like, but I was curious to see my own. Had they just put my name, or had they added something to signify my life, my work, maybe a small book to represent, my love of reading, or the logo of the nonprofit where I worked? The thought felt presumptuous, but a part of me hoped they had seen me clearly enough to add a personal touch. My eyes went to the base of the tree, to the names Richard and Elizabeth Moore, my paternal grandparents. I smiled. I had fond memories of Grandpa Richard's workshop. From there, I let my gaze travel up the strong central trunk to Thomas and Mary Moore, my parents. Their portraits were painted with warmth and accuracy, capturing them on their wedding day, young, hopeful, and smiling. Sprouting directly from them were the three main branches I knew so well. I looked at Mark's first. His name was rendered in a strong, masculine script, and next to it, the letters MBA were written in smaller, but still proud gold letters. His wife, Sarah, was painted beautifully beside him, and their two sons, Jacob and Noah, were nestled on smaller twigs below. It was a perfect little family unit, a testament to the success my father so deeply valued. Then, my eyes drifted to Jessica's branch. It was, of course, the most ornate. Her name was a flowing, elaborate cursive, Jessica Moore Chen. Her branch was laden with painted cherry blossoms, a nod to her fashion brand's aesthetic. Her husband David was there, and their three daughters were depicted as cherubic angels. It was pure Jessica, beautiful, curated, and designed for public admiration. And then I looked for the third branch, my branch. It wasn't there. I blinked, thinking I must have missed it. My eyes darted back to where the branches split from our parents. There were only two, Mark's and Jessica's. A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. That couldn't be right. Maybe I was a smaller branch, coming off one of theirs? That didn't make sense. I started a more systematic search. My gaze moved methodically over every inch of the mural. I saw my Uncle Robert's entire family, all four of his kids and their spouses. I saw Aunt Carol's daughter, who lived in Australia and hadn't been home in a decade. She was there. I saw distant cousins whose names I barely recognized. I found my mother's side of the family, a whole sprawling section of the tree filled with names I'd only ever heard in passing. They were all accounted for. Everyone was woven into this golden tapestry of family. My breath hitched. My eyes were scanning faster now, a frantic, desperate search. The initial curiosity had curdled into a cold, creeping dread. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching someone else have this surreal experience. The cheerful chatter of the party faded into a dull, roaring sound in my ears. Then I saw it. At the very bottom of the trunk, tucked away near the roots, was a small, lovingly painted portrait of Buddy, our golden retriever who had passed away last year. He had a goofy, tongue-out expression, and above his head was a tiny, shimmering halo. His name, Buddy Moore, was written in the same gold calligraphy as everyone else's. The dog was on the family tree, but I was not. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. It was as if the ground had fallen away beneath me. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a mistake. You don't forget a daughter but remember a dog. You don't forget your own child, but remember a second cousin who lives on another continent. This was a choice. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty space on the wall, the space where I was supposed to be. It was a void, a deliberate, calculated omission. 112 names. I counted them in my head, a frantic tally of everyone who mattered more than me. Every aunt, every uncle, every cousin, every in-law, every child, and one dog. They all belonged. I did not. My blood ran cold. The warmth of the room, the scent of the roses, the sound of the laughter. It all felt alien. I was a foreigner in my own family's home, at my own parents' anniversary. I looked up from the mural and saw my reflection in the dark glass of the window opposite me. A woman with a pale face and wide, shocked eyes. A stranger. Slowly, I took a step back, and then another, pulling myself away from the wall. The mural was a declaration. It was a beautifully painted, gold-leafed announcement to the world of who was in and who was out, and I was out. My entire life, I had felt like I was on the fringes of my family, but I had always assumed I was still in the picture. I was wrong. They hadn't just pushed me to the edge. They had cut me out of the frame completely. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen. My mind was a whirlwind of denial and a sickening, rising certainty. I told myself there had to be a reason, a logical explanation. Maybe the artist ran out of room. Maybe there was a miscommunication. I had to ask. I couldn't just walk away without knowing with absolute certainty that this was as cruel as it felt. I scanned the room for my mother. She was standing with a small group of her friends from her book club, holding a glass of white wine and laughing. She looked happy, radiant. I hated that I was about to ruin that for her, but I needed an answer. I felt like a child again, small and uncertain, needing a parent to explain a world that didn't make sense. I walked over, my legs feeling strangely heavy, like I was moving through water. I waited for a pause in their conversation, my hands clasped tightly in front of me to keep them from shaking. "Mom?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. She turned, her smile faltering slightly when she saw my face. "Rachel, what is it, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." Her friends looked at me with polite curiosity. I felt my face flush, hating that this was happening in front of an audience. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She excused herself and let me lead her to a slightly quieter corner of the room, near the hallway. She was still smiling, but it was a strained, impatient smile. The party was waiting for her. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was expecting me to complain about something trivial, like the music being too loud. I took a breath. "The mural," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "It's beautiful, but I'm not on it." My mother's face went blank for a second. She blinked, as if processing my words. She didn't look shocked or horrified or apologetic. She looked mildly annoyed. She glanced over at the family tree on the far wall and then back at me. She shrugged. It was a small, dismissive gesture, a flick of her shoulders that undid my entire world. "Oh, that," she said, her voice casual. "We didn't think you'd want to be on it. You're not really into sentimental things." The words hit me with a physical force. It felt like being slapped. "Not into sentimental things?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "Mom, it's a family tree. It's our family's history." "Well, yes," she said, sighing, as if I were being deliberately difficult. "But you know how you are, Rachel. You're so practical. We just figured you'd think it was all a bit silly and over the top." She was defining me to my own face. She was telling me who I was and what I felt, and she was wrong on every count. Before I could respond, my father appeared at her side, a fresh drink in his hand. "Everything all right over here?" he boomed, his good mood still intact. "Rachel's just asking about the mural," my mother said, her tone a clear signal to him. "Handle this." My father followed her gaze to the tree and then looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. He let out a short, sharp snort of laughter. "You'd have rolled your eyes at it anyway," he said. "You'd have said it was a waste of money." "I gave Jessica $2,000 for it," I said, my voice flat and cold. The words hung in the air between us, a stark, undeniable fact. My father's smirk vanished. His face hardened. For a second he looked caught, but he recovered quickly, shifting from amusement to aggression. It was his go-to defense mechanism. "That's not the point," he snapped, his voice dropping to a low growl. "The point is you have no appreciation for family tradition. You never have. You're always on the outside, looking in, judging the rest of us." The accusation was so wildly unjust it stole my breath. I was the one who remembered birthdays. I was the one who sent flowers on their anniversary every year. I was the one who called my grandmother every Sunday. I was the one who paid to fix their leaky roof last winter. No questions asked. I was the one who kept this family afloat, and he had the audacity to accuse me of not appreciating it. I looked from his angry face to my mother's closed-off expression. There was no remorse, no regret. I finally understood. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. They had sat down with a list of 112 names, and they had consciously decided to leave mine off. They had looked at my life, my personality, or their twisted version of it, and judged me unworthy of a place on our family tree. They had done it, and they felt justified. I saw Jessica gliding towards us, a triumphant smile on her face. She had probably seen us huddled in the corner and had come to manage the situation. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes darting between me and our parents. "Rachel is upset about the tree," my mother said, her voice dripping with martyrdom. Jessica's face hardened, her expression mirroring our father's. "Oh my God, Rachel, can you not make a scene?" she hissed. "It's Mom and Dad's anniversary. This is not about you." "It wasn't a scene," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I just asked a question. It's always a scene with you." Mark's voice cut in as he joined the little huddle. The whole family was assembled now, a united front against me. "You can't just be happy for them. You have to find something wrong, something to criticize." They were closing ranks, reinforcing their shared narrative of me. Rachel, the difficult one. Rachel, the cold one. Rachel, the ungrateful one. It was a story they had been telling themselves for years, and it was the story that had allowed them to paint me out of their history without a shred of guilt. In their eyes, I deserved it. I looked at their four faces, my father's defensive anger, my mother's weary impatience, my sister's righteous indignation, my brother's casual contempt. These were the people who were supposed to love me, unconditionally. In that moment, I saw with blinding clarity that their love was not only conditional, it was transactional. I was valued for my utility, for my silence, for my wallet, but I, as a person, was an inconvenience, an anomaly they had finally decided to formally discard. "You're right," I said, my voice steady now, infused with a chilling calm. "This isn't about me." I turned without another word and walked away. I could feel their eyes on my back, a mixture of surprise and, I was sure, relief. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't cried. I had accepted their judgment and was removing myself, just as they wanted. They had won, or so they thought. Walking away from them felt like breaking a fever. The hot, suffocating atmosphere of their judgment receded with every step I took. I moved through the party like a phantom. I passed my Aunt Carol, who was now telling a story about her garden, and she didn't even seem to see me. I passed the bar where my cousins were laughing loudly over a shared joke. The whole world of my family was carrying on, vibrant and loud and completely oblivious to the fact that one of its own had just been amputated. No one called out my name. No one reached for my arm. No one asked if I was okay. My departure was as insignificant as my presence had been. I reached the front door, my hand closing around the cool brass of the doorknob. I didn't look back. I knew what I would see. The warm glow of the party, the smiling faces, the beautiful gilded lie hanging on the wall, a perfect family portrait with a person-shaped hole in it that only I could feel. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, the sound final and absolute. The cool night air was a relief against my hot skin. The forced smiles and cheerful music were replaced by the quiet chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. I walked down the stone path to my car, my heels making sharp, rhythmic clicks on the pavement. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. I slid into the driver's seat and just sat there for a minute, the silence of the car a welcome embrace. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I was waiting for the tears to come. I was waiting for the wave of grief, the gut-wrenching sob that I was sure was building in my chest. But it didn't come. The shock had burned away the sadness, leaving something else in its place. A cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear resolve. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my practicality was a lack of feeling. They had mistaken my quiet nature for an absence of a soul, and they had used that misinterpretation as justification to erase me. My mother's words echoed in my head. "We didn't think you'd want to be on it. You're not really into sentimental things." It was the ultimate gaslighting. She had erased me and then blamed it on a personality she had invented for me. I took a deep, shuddering breath, but it wasn't a sob. It was the breath you take before you dive into deep water. My family had pushed me off a cliff. They expected me to fall. They didn't realize I knew how to fly. I reached into the passenger seat and pulled my laptop bag onto my lap. The party was still going on inside. The house? I could see the lights, hear the faint thrum of the music. They were probably toasting their perfect family again. They had forgotten about me already. I opened my laptop. The screen bathed my face in a cool, blue light. I clicked on a folder on my desktop, one I had created years ago. It was labeled, simply, Family. Inside wasn't photos or memories. It was spreadsheets, scanned documents, and email chains. It was the hidden ledger of my family's life, a meticulous record of every time I had been their silent safety net. I clicked open the first subfolder, Parents. Inside was a PDF of the property tax bill for their house from last year. A bill for $8,000 that they couldn't pay. I had paid it. There was a scanned invoice from a roofing company for $12,000 for a full replacement after a storm. I had paid that too, draining a significant portion of my emergency fund while my father promised to pay me back when things turned around. He never had. There were records of dozens of smaller transfers, money for groceries, for car repairs, for my mother's dental work. I clicked back and opened the folder labeled Jessica. Inside was the record of the $2,000 transfer for the mural. Below that was a much larger one, a transfer for $10,000 from 2 years ago. It was the seed, money for her inclusive fashion boutique. She had called me in tears, saying the bank had denied her a loan. She had sworn me to secrecy, especially from our parents and Mark, because she was too embarrassed to admit she needed help. I had given her the money, a loan with no interest and no repayment schedule. It was, I had told her, an investment in her dream. She had never paid back a dime. Then I opened Mark's folder. It was thinner, but it was there. Records of the 6 months I covered his car payments when he was between jobs, assuring him it was no big deal. The $500 I'd daluai sent him for his son's birthday party because he'd overspent on a new sound system for his home theater. It was all there, in black and white, a quantifiable, documented history of my value to them. I had been their emergency fund, their silent investor, their lender of last resort. I had done it quietly, without demanding thanks or recognition because I thought that's what families did. You supported each other. You held each other up. But I was wrong. I wasn't holding them up. I was enabling them. My quiet support had allowed them to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford, all while viewing me as the strange, cold, unfeeling daughter who didn't appreciate the very family she was bankrolling. My money was welcome at the table. I was not. I looked back at the warm, glowing house. A house whose roof I had paid for. A house where my parents were celebrating 30 years of a life I had helped secure. Inside, they were admiring a piece of art that I had helped fund, a mural that declared to the world that I did not exist. The cold resolve in my chest solidified into a plan. It was simple, it was quiet, and it would be devastating. They wanted me erased? Fine. I would grant their wish. I would erase myself from their lives so completely that all they would be left with were the holes where my support used to be. The empty spaces, just like the empty space on that wall where my name was supposed to be. I closed the folders and opened my online banking app. My fingers moved quickly, methodically. First, I went to the scheduled payments. The monthly $500 transfer I sent to my parents' account to help with bills. Canceled. The automatic contribution to the family vacation fund that Jessica managed. Canceled. I went through the list, and with a series of quiet, deliberate clicks, I severed every financial tie that bound me to them. It was a digital amputation. Quick, clean, and painless. For me, I closed the laptop and put it away. I started the car, the engine humming to life in the quiet street. I didn't look at the house again. There was nothing there for me anymore. As I pulled away from the curb and drove off into the night, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The hurt was still there, a deep, cold stone in my gut. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't just swallowing their disrespect. I wasn't just absorbing another cut. I was fighting back. Not with words or with tears, but with the one weapon they had never seen me use, my absence. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. I moved on autopilot, my mind a million miles away from the mechanics of traffic lights and turn signals. When I walked into my small, quiet apartment, the silence was a physical presence. It was the same silence that had always been there, but tonight, it felt different. It was no longer the silence of loneliness, but the silence of a blank page. A story waiting to be written. For years, my life had been a masterclass in masking. Being autistic in a neurotypical world, especially in a family like mine, meant I had learned to be a translator in my own life. I translated my direct, literal thoughts into softer, more palatable sentences. I translated my discomfort with loud noises and bright lights into a personality trait they labeled introverted or antisocial. I translated my need for routine and predictability into being rigid and inflexible. The most exhausting translation was emotional. I didn't express happiness with loud exclamations or sadness with dramatic tears. My feelings were deep, but quiet. So I learned to perform emotions for them. I manufactured a brighter smile, a more concerned frown, a lighter laugh. It was a constant, draining performance, and the applause was simply being tolerated, being allowed to remain in the room. I sank onto my sofa, the events of the evening replaying in my mind. The mural wasn't the beginning of the erasure. It was the culmination. It was the grand finale of a lifetime of being edited, redacted, and misunderstood. My family had never known the real me because the real me was too much trouble for them. The real me asked too many questions. The real me didn't understand their social games and pointed out logical fallacies in their arguments. The real me needed to decompress after social events instead of basking in the afterglow. This real me was inconvenient. So, I had built a more convenient version of myself for them, a character named Rachel who doesn't cause a fuss. This character was quiet. She was practical. She was reliable. And, most importantly, she was useful. My usefulness became my primary purpose in the family dynamic. It started in small ways. In high school, my siblings would borrow money from me for movie tickets or clothes, rolling their eyes at my meticulously kept ledger where I tracked every dollar. "It's just $5, Rach, relax," Mark would say, snatching the bill from my hand. It was never about the money. It was about the lack of respect, the casual dismissal of my boundaries. As we grew older, the stakes grew higher. When my father's small business faltered, I was the one who quietly funneled a portion of my salary into their account each month so they wouldn't lose the house. I did it because I loved them, and because I was terrified of what would happen if my usefulness ran out. Would they have any reason to keep me around? If I wasn't the reliable one, the financially stable one, the one who could fix their problems? Without asking for anything in return, what was my role? I had conflated being needed with being loved. Tonight, they had given me the answer. My role, ultimately, was to be invisible, to provide the foundation without being acknowledged as the architect, to pay for the canvas, the paint, and the artist, but to not have my own name painted on the finished work. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my quiet, desperate attempts to belong and used it to build a monument to my own exclusion. My father's words echoed in my head. "You're always on the outside, looking in, judging the rest of us." The irony was an open wound. I wasn't judging them. I was trying to figure out the rules of a game everyone else seemed to know instinctively. I was the one who studied their expressions, their tones, their idioms, just to keep up. I was the one working 10 times as hard, just to achieve a baseline level of social acceptance that came to them as easily as breathing. And they saw my effort, my intense observation, as judgment. They saw my mask and mistook it for a sneer. I stood up and walked to my desk, my mind finally, chillingly clear. The shock had worn off, and the cold resolve I'd felt in the car had now settled deep into my bones. It wasn't about revenge, not in the hot-blooded screaming match way my family might have understood it. It was about truth. It was about consequences. My entire life they had set the terms of our relationship. I would now set my own. And the first term was that I would no longer pay for the privilege of being disrespected. My decision was simple. They had erased me from their story. I would now erase them from my life. Not just my financial life, my entire life. The mask was coming off. The performance was over. The character of Rachel who doesn't cause a fuss was officially retired. They were about to meet the real me, not through my words, but through the deafening silence of my absence. They had built their comfortable world on the invisible pillars of my support, my money, and my willingness to be small. "If they want me erased," I whispered to the empty room, "I'll show them what life looks like without me holding it up." I would not be a ghost in their house any longer. I would be a ghost in their bank accounts, a ghost in their futures, a ghost in the comfortable, easy lives they had built on my back. They would feel my absence not as a sudden blow, but as a slow, creeping rot. The foundation would crumble, and they would have no one to blame but the people they saw in the mirror every morning. The show was over. It was time for them to see what the stage looked like when the curtain finally came down. The first few days were strangely quiet, both externally and internally. I expected to feel a constant, churning anxiety, a frantic urge to undo what I had done. But there was nothing, just a profound, unnerving calm. The first thing I did was go into the More Family Strong group chat and mute it indefinitely. I didn't leave the group. That would have been a visible, dramatic act. Instead, I simply turned off the sound. I chose to become a silent observer of a conversation I was no longer a part of. The messages trickled in, just as I knew they would. The morning after the party, from Jessica. "Hope you got home okay last night. Not cool to just disappear like that." No apology. No question about why I had left. Just a scolding, positioning me as the one who had broken the social contract. I read the message and set my phone down. 2 days later, from my mother, "Rachel, I haven't heard from you. Are you still upset about that silly painting? You're being far too sensitive." It was a classic move, minimizing my feelings and reframing their cruelty as my emotional failing. I archived the chat. For a week, that was it. They had their narrative. Rachel was having one of her moods. She was being overly sensitive and dramatic. She would get over it and come crawling back, because that's what she always did. They went on with their lives, confident in the established order of things. The first tremor occurred exactly 8 days after the party. It arrived in the form of a text from Jessica. Hey, did you send your half for the final payment to the caterer? They just sent me an invoice for the outstanding balance. I thought we paid it all off. For years, we'd had a shared digital account for family events, which Jessica managed. In reality, I was the only one who consistently contributed to it. I would transfer a few $100s every month, and that fund would cover everything, from birthday cakes to anniversary party caterers. My siblings would conveniently forget to add their share, and I would quietly cover the difference to avoid conflict. I had stopped the automatic transfers the night I left the party. The fund was now empty. I stared at her message. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. The old Rachel, the masking, people-pleasing Rachel, would have immediately apologized, made an excuse about being busy, and sent the money. The new Rachel did nothing. I simply put my phone back in my pocket. 2 hours later, another text. Rach? The caterer is calling me again. This is embarrassing. Can you please just send the money? The politeness was gone, replaced by irritation. Her embarrassment was my problem to solve. I continued to ignore her. That evening, my phone rang. It was Mark. I let it go to voicemail. His message was a sigh of exasperation. Hey Rach, Jessie is freaking out about some bill, and Mom said you're not answering her calls. Look, whatever is going on, you need to stop being childish. Just call Jessie and sort it out. We don't have time for this drama. Childish? Drama. They were using their entire well-worn vocabulary to describe my boundary setting. They didn't see it as a consequence of their actions. They saw it as an inconvenient tantrum. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. The second tremor hit a week later. I received a frantic voicemail from my mother. Her voice was high-pitched with panic. Rachel, my credit card was declined at the grocery store. The grocery store? It's never done that before. I tried calling the bank and they said the automatic payment from your account didn't go through. Is something wrong with your bank? You need to fix this immediately. I have a cart full of food here. For the past 5 years, I had been paying her credit card bill. It started as a temporary measure when my dad's business was struggling, but like every other financial loan, it had morphed into a permanent expectation. She didn't even see it as my money anymore. It was just a feature of her financial landscape, like a sunrise. I deleted the voicemail. I imagined her in the checkout line, flustered and humiliated. A small, cold part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of sadness. It hadn't had to be this way. A simple apology, a moment of genuine remorse, that was all it would have taken to avoid this. But they were incapable of it. The silence from my end continued. The messages in the family chat turned from confusion to anger. They talked about me as if I wasn't there. Mark. Has anyone heard from Rachel? This is ridiculous. Jessica. Nothing. She's punishing us over that stupid tree. It's insane. My father chimed in for the first time. She'll come. Around when she needs something. She always does. That was the line that solidified my resolve. They truly believed I was the dependent one. They, with their unstable finances and constant need for bailouts, saw me, the one who had bailed them out time and time again, as the one who couldn't survive without them. The earthquake hit at the end of the month. It was an email from my father. The subject line was just my name, Rachel. The email read, "The bank just called. They said the house is in pre-foreclosure. They said the property tax hasn't been paid for the last quarter, and we've missed 2 mortgage payments. I died. Thought you were handling this. You have been handling this for 3 years. What have you done? You call me. You call me now." The email was a cocktail of fury, panic, and utter disbelief. The monthly mortgage and quarterly property tax payments I made were the only things keeping them in that house. The house where my erasure hung on the wall. The thought was so perfectly, brutally ironic. They had celebrated their legacy in a building that my quiet, unacknowledged support was paying for. Now, the legacy was facing eviction. That night my phone rang and buzzed incessantly. Calls and texts from my parents, my sister, my brother, aunts and uncles who had been recruited to be their flying monkeys. I turned my phone off completely for the first time in years. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the silence no longer just a choice, but a shield. They had built their world on the assumption that I would always be there to absorb the blows, pay the bills, and swallow the insults. They had assumed my silence was weakness. They were finally learning, in the most visceral way possible, that my silence was the withdrawal of their life support. And they were beginning to suffocate. 2 months passed in near total silence. I had blocked their numbers after the foreclosure email. I needed space to breathe, to exist outside the constant gravitational pull of their needs and their judgment. In that time, I focused on my work, finding solace in the logical, predictable world of numbers and financial planning. My nonprofit specialized in helping neurodivergent adults navigate the complexities of personal finance, a topic I was deeply passionate about. An invitation to speak at a small, regional neurodivergence conference had come a few weeks before, the anniversary party. I had initially accepted it as a professional challenge, a way to push myself out of my comfort zone. Now it felt like a lifeline, a connection to a community that understood the world in a way I did. The topic of my keynote was financial masking, the hidden costs of fitting in. The conference was held in a modest hotel ballroom. There were maybe 100 people in the audience, therapists, advocates, and neurodivergent individuals, like me. The atmosphere was the polar opposite of my parents' party. There was no loud music, the lighting was soft, and people were free to stim, wear noise-canceling headphones, or step out if they felt overwhelmed. It was a space built on acceptance, not performance. I started my speech by talking about the practical aspects of financial masking, the tendency to overspend on social outings to keep up with peers, the cost of hobbies we don't enjoy but pursue for social acceptance, the financial toll of burnout from pretending to be someone we're not. I had data, charts, and practical advice. The audience was attentive, nodding along. Then came the Q&A session. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "You talk about the financial costs," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "But what about the emotional cost, especially with family? How do you set financial boundaries when your family sees your every attempt at self-preservation as a personal attack?" Her question struck a chord deep inside me. All the data and charts fell away. All the professional detachment I had carefully constructed vanished. I looked at her, and in her eyes, I saw my own reflection. I took a deep breath. "That's the hardest part," I began, my voice softer now, less the keynote speaker and more just me. Because with family, the lines are so blurred. You're expected to give, not just financially, but emotionally. You're expected to play a role, and if you're neurodivergent, that role often feels like it was written for someone else. You spend your whole life trying to get the lines right, trying to fit in, to prove you belong. My heart started pounding. I hadn't planned to do this, but the words came tumbling out, a story I didn't realize I was ready to tell. "Recently," I said, my gaze sweeping across the quiet, focused faces, "my parents celebrated their 30th anniversary. My siblings commissioned this beautiful, huge painting of our family tree. A real work of art. It had 112 names on it, going back generations. Every aunt, uncle, cousin, and in-law was there. They even included the family dog, who passed away last year." I paused. The room was utterly silent. My name wasn't on it, not because they forgot. They told me later that they didn't think I'd care, that I wasn't sentimental. They used a personality they invented for me to justify erasing me. For years, I had been the family's financial safety net. I helped pay for that house, that party, that very painting. I thought that by being useful I was earning my place. But the tree showed me the truth. My money had a place in the family. I did not. Tears welled in my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. The woman who asked the question is right. Setting a boundary feels like an attack to a family that is used to having none. When I stopped being their safety net, they called it a betrayal. They didn't see that the real betrayal was a family tree with 112 names and a daughter who was taught that her only value was the support she could provide in silence. I finished my talk, and for a moment there was no applause, just a profound, shared silence. Then, one by one, people started to stand up. The applause that followed wasn't loud or performative. It was a wave of quiet, heartfelt validation. It was the exact opposite of the applause at the anniversary party. This time, I was seen. I didn't know that someone in the back of the room had been recording my speech on their phone. They posted a 2-minute clip of that story on TikTok that evening. The caption was simple: "This is what it feels like to be the neurodivergent child in a neurotypical family. Number 112 names." I woke up the next morning to a world that had shifted on its axis. The video had 1 million views. By noon, it was at 5 million. It had been shared on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. The hashtag #112 names was trending. Thousands of people, neurodivergent and not, were sharing their own stories of being the family scapegoat, the unseen supporter, the one whose worth was conditional. Then, the internet sleuths got to work. My sister Jessica was a micro-influencer. Her brand was built around a carefully curated image of wholesome, inclusive family life. She had, of course, posted about the anniversary party. She had posted a dozen artfully filtered photos of the family tree mural, boasting in the caption about the importance of honoring your roots and celebrating every single member of the family. Someone connected her public post to my anonymous story. They put a screenshot of her Instagram next to a clip from my speech. The caption read, "The inclusive sister who honors her roots so much she forgot to include her actual sister on the family tree. But don't worry, the dog made it." The internet exploded. The comment section on Jessica's boutique page, on her personal Instagram, on her brand's TikTok, became a raging fire of condemnation. The hypocrisy was too blatant, too perfectly packaged for public consumption. My quiet, personal pain had become a viral case study in familial cruelty, and the court of public opinion was about to hand down its verdict. The phone call from Jessica came 3 days after the video went viral. I had unblocked her number out of a morbid curiosity, wanting to see what her move would be. I shouldn't have been surprised that it wasn't an apology. "How could you do this to me?" she shrieked the moment I answered. There was no preamble, no greeting, just pure, undiluted rage. "You've ruined everything. My brand is getting thousands of hate comments. My sponsors are dropping me, all because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about one stupid painting." "You erased me, Jess," I said, my voice calm and even. The contrast with her hysteria was stark. "You erased me? And then you posted online about how important every family member is. People notice the hypocrisy. That's not my fault, it's yours. I'm going to sue you," she screamed. "For defamation, for slander. I'm going to take every penny you have." Then she hung up. I knew the threat was instigated by our father. It was his playbook. When you're caught, don't apologize. Attack. Go on the offensive. Intimidate the other person into silence. It had worked on me my whole life. It wasn't going to work anymore. I hired a lawyer the next day. A week later, I was served with a lawsuit. Jessica was suing me for defamation and emotional distress, claiming my malicious lies had destroyed her business and reputation. The irony of her claiming emotional distress after what she had put me through was not lost on me. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, was practically giddy when I showed her the evidence I had compiled. "Oh, this is beautiful," she said, looking at the spreadsheet of my financial contributions. "This isn't a lawsuit. It's a gift." The discovery process was a brutal, systematic dismantling of my family's narrative. Ms. Albright requested every text message, every email, every financial record. We presented the bank statement showing my $2,000 transfer to Jessica with the memo family gift for the mural. The screenshots from the group chat where Jessica explicitly told me not to worry about the details of the mural after accepting my money. High-resolution photos of the family tree, which Jessica herself had posted online. My lawyer had an expert blow up the image, circling the name Buddy Moore in red. Voicemails and emails from my parents and siblings, spanning years, alternately begging for money and berating me for perceived slights. A full financial audit showing that I had contributed over $100,000 to my family's living expenses over the past 5 years alone. The final piece of evidence was a recording of the phone call where Jessica had screamed at me and threatened to sue. It perfectly demonstrated her malice and complete lack of remorse. Faced with an avalanche of irrefutable proof, Jessica's lawyer advised her to drop the case. But my father, stubborn and proud, pushed her to continue. So we went to the preliminary hearing. The courtroom was small and quiet. My sister, my parents, and my brother sat on one side, a miserable, angry little huddle. I sat on the other with Ms. Albright. Jessica wouldn't look at me. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, read through the evidence presented by both sides. Her expression grew more and more incredulous as she looked over my documents. She looked up from a bank statement, peered over her glasses at my family, and then looked at me. "Let me see if I have this straight," the judge said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your daughter, the plaintiff," she gestured towards Jessica, accepted $2,000 from her sister, the defendant, to commission a family tree. She then intentionally excluded the defendant from said tree, but saw fit to include the family pet. When the defendant spoke about this experience of being excluded, without ever naming the plaintiff. The plaintiff sued her for defamation. Is that the situation? Jessica's lawyer mumbled a weak, essentially, yes, Your Honor. The judge slammed the file shut. The sound echoed in the silent courtroom. This is the most frivolous, malicious, and frankly idiotic lawsuit I have ever seen in my 20 years on the bench, she declared. Case dismissed, with prejudice. The plaintiff will pay all of the defendant's legal fees. And I'd advise you to take a long, hard look at the definition of the word defamation before you ever think of wasting this court's time again. She banged her gavel. It was over. The collapse was swift and total. The story of the failed lawsuit and the judge's brutal takedown went public, adding fuel to the already raging dumpster fire of Jessica's reputation. Her brand, built on a lie of inclusivity, was toxic. Within a month, she announced she was closing her online store. The financial consequences for my parents were just as severe. Without my monthly contributions, the pre-foreclosure notice turned into a real foreclosure. They were forced to sell the family home at a loss to avoid bankruptcy. The grand house where they had celebrated their legacy was gone. The mural was painted over in beige by the new owners, its gilded history erased as completely as I had been. They moved into a small, cramped rental condo 2 towns over. Mark, whose own finances were shakier than he let on, couldn't help them. His company had started asking questions after the story went viral, and his carefully constructed corporate image was beginning to crack. They had built a kingdom on a foundation of my silent sacrifice. When I walked away, the entire thing had crumbled into dust. I didn't attend the final hearing. Ms. Albright called to give me the news of the dismissal, and I felt a quiet, profound sense of relief. There was no joy, no triumphant fist pump. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of a long, chronic illness. The fever had finally broken. In the months that followed, I watched their downfall from a distance, through the sterile lens of social media and the occasional, awkward update from a mutual cousin. I saw the post about Jessica closing her business, filled with self-pitying language about cancel culture and online bullying. I saw the real estate listing for my childhood home, the photos showing empty rooms stripped of all their warmth and history. Each update was a small aftershock, a reminder of the earthquake I had survived. I expected to feel anger, or maybe a bitter sense of satisfaction. I had been waiting for that feeling, the one where I could finally say, they got what they deserved. But it never came. All I felt was a deep, aching sadness for the family that could have been. The family where love wasn't a transaction, where belonging wasn't conditional, and where I didn't have to be someone else to be accepted. That family had never existed. I was finally just mourning the ghost of it. My family, who once erased me from a painting, now had to live with the indelible, tangible proof of my absence everywhere they looked. They felt it in the downgrade from a spacious home to a cramped condo. They felt it in the bounced checks and the collection calls. Jessica felt it in the silence where her thriving business used to be. Most of all, I think, they felt it in the silence from my end. The phone that never rang, the text that never came, the financial crisis that was no longer magically solved. They had wanted me invisible, and they had gotten their wish. The void I left was louder than my presence had ever been. My life, on the other hand, began to fill with sound, quiet sounds at first. The laughter of new friends from the neurodivergent community I had found. The thoughtful, engaging conversations with colleagues who valued my mind, not my wallet. The simple, peaceful silence of my own apartment, which no longer felt empty, but felt safe. I was building my own tree, branch by branch, with people who saw me, the real me, and chose to stay. These new roots were not bound by blood or obligation, but by mutual respect and genuine affection. They were stronger than any gilded painting. One evening, I was having dinner with a few of those new friends. The conversation was easy, flowing from one interesting topic to another. No one interrupted each other. No one was performing. We were all just being. And in that moment, I realized I was truly happy. It was a quiet, steady happiness, not the loud, performative joy my family had always chased. It was mine. They had thought leaving me off their tree would leave me rootless. Instead, it had forced me to plant my own garden. They wanted me invisible. They taught me silence. And silence was the sharpest weapon I ever had. If this story hit you hard, like this video, subscribe, and share your own story in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're watching from.